The snow fell in sheets that night, a quiet curtain over the crooked cabins of the town, softening the broken fences and burying the stains of the street. Yet inside the Whitlock shack there was no peace, only the bitter rasp of a drunk man's voice cutting through the storm. Silas Whitlock staggered to the doorway, a bottle in his hand, his boots scraping the warped threshold. Behind him, the lantern swung and cast a crooked light, spilling over his daughter's pale face. Hazel May sat stiff on the bench by the fire, her hands clasped, her eyes lowered as though she could make herself invisible. 21 winters had passed over her slender shoulders, and she had learned to live quiet, to bend under shame like brittle grass in the wind. Her father's voice slurred, cracked, yet carried with startling sharpness into the storm. "She's blind, take her!" The words were flung into the night like stones, hitting harder than fists ever could. The neighbors, drawn by noise, opened their shutters a crack. Faces, half hidden in the glow of lamplight, leaned to listen. Judgments spread like wildfire through that frigid air. The sound of Silas's bitterness was their supper story now, something to carry to the mercantile in the morning. And there, standing bare-chested in the snow, was Elias Redhawk. The giant Apache, taller than the doorframe itself, his skin dark against the pallor of frost, stood silent. His breath steamed into the night, his eyes steady as stone. His long hair was wet with melting flakes, yet he neither shivered nor moved. He had not come for her. He had come for firewood, perhaps trade, but Silas's tongue had made it into something else. Hazel May felt the floor tilt beneath her, though she did not move. Shame gathered hot in her throat. To be offered like livestock, broken livestock at that. Her father's cruelty had no bottom. She did not speak, did not dare meet the gaze of the man outside, but she felt it burning through the storm. Silas laughed harshly, swaying on his feet. "She can't see a thing, can't cook worth a damn, not fit for a man. Take her off my hands, Redhawk. You want her? You can have her." The bottle slipped, shattering against the snow-packed step. The whiskey spread dark like blood in the white. A murmur rippled across the darkened windows of the neighbors' homes. A girl blind and unwanted. A father who would trade her away to an Apache. The town would feast on this tale. Hazel May's heart hammered. She wanted to vanish, to sink into the cracked floorboards. Yet something drew her gaze up, hesitant, trembling, and she met Elias's eyes. For the briefest moment the storm seemed to still. He looked at her, not as if she were broken, not as if she were shame. His gaze was not pity. It was recognition. He took a step closer, the snow crunching under his moccasins. Silas sneered, arms thrown wide as though victorious. "Take her. Worth nothing here. Blind as a bat." Elias lowered his head, leaning close enough that his voice could reach her, but not the gawking neighbors. His words, soft as falling snow, slipped into the crackling silence between them. "I know you can see." Hazel May's lips parted, though no sound came. Her chest tightened. He could not mean her eyes. Her vision was clear enough. No, he meant something else, something deeper, something she herself had long tried to hide. He spoke as though he saw past her silence, past her shame, into the marrow of her. Her father barked a laugh, hearing none of it. "See? She's no good even for answering. Like talking to a wall." He turned and lurched inside, leaving the doorway yawning open to the storm, the lantern's light spilling across the threshold. Elias straightened, his breath lifting in the cold. The neighbors watched with hungry eyes, waiting for violence, waiting for spectacle. Instead he stood motionless, his face unreadable. Then, without a word, he turned, his massive frame melting into the snowfall. His dark outline vanished into the white, leaving silence heavier than any shout. Hazel May sat frozen on the bench, her fingers digging into her palms. Shame burned through her body, but under it pulsed something else, an ember that had not stirred in years. Someone had seen her. Not as her father's burden, not as town gossip, but as herself. The whispers outside swelled, shutters slamming as the townfolk scurried back to their stoves. The story would spread before dawn. Her father would sleep off his rage. The bottle shards would freeze into the snow. Yet Hazel May would not forget the sound of that whisper, nor the way her chest had lifted when it touched her. The storm raged on, drumming against the crooked roof. Alone by the fire, Hazel May pressed her trembling hands to her eyes, feeling both the sting of tears and the strange, unsteady thrum of hope. For the first time in her life, she wondered if blindness was not in her, but in the way others refused to look. Beyond the cabin, the snow swallowed the figure of Elias Redhawk. Yet she felt him still, his words echoing, a thread binding her to the unknown. And in the silence after her father's shouts, that whisper grew louder in her soul, promising change she could neither name nor stop. When the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint sound of boots crunching far off, she lifted her head. A shadow moved in the distance, dark against the swirling white, and her breath caught. She did not know if it was him returning, or only her longing shaping the storm into a man. But she knew, deep in her chest, that nothing would be the same again. The days after the shouting were buried beneath snow, so deep it silenced the earth itself. Hazel May rose each morning to the hush of white outside her window, to the brittle stillness of a cabin that smelled of ash and whiskey. Her father had not spoken of that night. He drank as though the memory could be drowned in the bottom of a bottle. But the neighbors remembered. Their glances burned hotter than fire when she stepped outside, their whispers clung to her coat like burrs. Blind girl. Cast off. Apache's charity. She kept to herself, moving with careful steps, her breath fogging in the frozen air. The wind cut sharp, but the wound inside her was sharper. Yet, through that wound pulsed the whisper she could not forget. I know you can see. It was 3 days later when the first knock came, not on the door, but on the silence itself. Hazel May opened the door and found no words waiting, only wood stacked neatly against the threshold. Split, straight, and higher than her waist. She pressed her hand to the timber, the chill seeping into her palm. Her father, sprawled in drunken sleep, had done no such labor. The truth pressed clear. Elias Redhawk had been there. The next morning, smoke curled richer from the chimney, and the cabin grew warm. Hazel May sat by the fire, her hands curled in her lap, listening to her father's snores. She wondered what debt might now hang over her, yet no man came to collect it. Only more would appear the next evening, this time left in silence, with no footprints remaining in the storm. On the 4th day, she found a bundle of rabbit meat wrapped in hide. She touched it with trembling hands, shame and gratitude warring in her chest. To accept was to live, yet to accept was also to invite gossip. The neighbors already murmured. She had seen them in the mercantile, Ruthie and Calloway leaning close to another woman, whispering behind a glove, eyes darting toward her. Blind girl being kept alive by an Apache, she heard half-hidden, enough to send blood rushing hot into her cheeks. Hazel May left quickly, but when she reached home, her father spat the same venom, louder, uglier. Better watch yourself, girl. You'll be nothing but his squaw if you let him hang around. He swayed, eyes narrowed, voice heavy with both liquor and bitterness. She turned away, her throat burning. That night the snow fell again, erasing tracks, erasing shame for a moment. When she stepped out to bring in the wood, she found him there at last, Elias, standing half-shadowed by the trees. He said nothing, but his presence filled the clearing, a figure carved from silence and storm. She froze, hands clutching her shawl. His eyes met hers, steady, patient, as though waiting for her to choose. She wanted to speak, to ask why he came, but the words clung heavy on her tongue. He stepped forward, placed another log on the pile, and turned to leave. Her voice broke free, small and shaking. Why? Elias paused. Snow gathered on his shoulders, his breath clouded in the moonlight. He did not answer with words. Instead he bent, brushed snow from her porch step with his broad hand, then straightened and looked at her once more. The action, simple as it was, spoke more than any sentence. He was clearing a path, not for himself but for her. Her heart ached with a strange, sharp warmth. She whispered thank you, but the wind carried it away. The pattern grew. Days turned into weeks. He appeared like a shadow at dawn or dusk, mending the fence her father neglected, setting traps near the creek, leaving food by the door. Never asking, never demanding. His silence grew heavy, yet not threatening, rather steady, like a rock in the river that refused to move even as the water battered past. Hazel May began to wait for it, the quiet rhythm of his presence. She watched from the window sometimes, her breath fogging the glass as she traced his figure through the flurries. There was dignity in the way he worked, in the curve of his scarred back as he split logs, in the deliberate patience of his movements. He never hurried, never boasted. He simply did. And slowly, something in her began to stir. She found herself standing straighter when she stepped into town, though the whispers had grown sharper. Ruthie hissed in the mercantile. "She's already his, you can see it." Mrs. Hargrove clucked her tongue in church, muttering that shame breeds shame. Yet when Hazel May walked home, she held her head just high enough to see past their judgment. One evening, the storm broke and the sky cleared to a pale silver. Elias brought no wood, no food, only something small in his palm. He placed it on the porch rail before her, an object carved from cedar, delicate wings spread. A bird, no bigger than her thumb, its eyes etched with infinite care. Her throat tightened. She traced the tiny feathers with her finger, warmth spreading through her chest. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Elias's gaze lingered, then dropped to her feet, tracing the way she shifted her steps, careful, deliberate. His voice came at last low, almost hidden beneath the wind. "Snow makes us all blind, but I see your steps." The words struck deep. He had watched her, not as a burden, not as a broken girl, but as someone navigating the world with quiet courage. He had seen what no one else cared to. Her breath caught, and before fear could stop her, she reached out. Her hand found his, rough and scarred, warm against the cold. She did not hold long, only enough for her heart to leap with something she had never felt before. Her father's voice shattered it. From inside came the crash of a bottle, his shout filling the cabin. "Useless girl! Get back here!" Shame surged hot across her skin. She pulled away, clutching the bird close. Elias's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, only turned back toward the trees. Hazel May stood on the porch, the carved bird pressed against her chest. The storm clouds were returning, rolling low across the horizon, and the cold deepened. Yet inside her, beneath the sting of her father's words, the ember glowed stronger. She could not deny it now. She was no longer invisible. As Elias disappeared into the snow, her father's voice rose again in drunken rage, and the neighbors' windows flickered with lamplight, ready to carry fresh gossip. But Hazel May's hand trembled not from fear, but from the weight of something new. For in the hush of the falling snow, she could still hear his whisper, echoing through her bones. "I see your steps." And when the wind shifted, carrying the faint crackle of torches from the town, she lifted her head, realizing the storm was not only in the sky, it was coming for her. The winter deepened, and with it the tongues of the town grew sharper. Hazel May felt their weight each time she stepped beyond the cabin. The mercantile, once a place of routine, now bristled with whispers that clung like frost to her skirts. Ruthie and Calloway's voice cut loudest, though feigned as a hush. "Blind girl kept alive by an Apache," she said, leaning over barrels of flour, her words drifting like smoke. Others nodded, not daring open defiance but savoring the taste of scandal. Hazel May bore it with bowed head, her basket held tight against her chest. She knew her father would never shield her. He slept off drink, his days a blur of curses and empty bottles. She walked alone, endured alone. Yet behind her solitude, she carried the memory of cedar wings in her pocket, the bird Elias had carved. It steadied her when the eyes grew too heavy, when Mrs. Hargrove muttered near the church doors, "Shame breeds shame." Marshall Boone stopped her once on the icy boardwalk, his voice low and weary. "Hazel May, you do best to keep distance from that man. Folks are stirring." His eyes were not cruel, but wary, as though her mere nearness to Elias was tinder for a fire he could not put out. She nodded, though her chest tightened. Boone's warning carried the truth she already felt. Judgment was building like a storm. Yet when she returned home, Elias was there again, quiet as snowfall, stacking wood along the side of the cabin. He did not look up at first, but she saw how careful his movements were, how deliberate. He was mending what her father had broken. She wanted to tell him of the gossip, the knives of words cutting her skin raw, but her throat closed around it. Instead, she watched in silence as his breath clouded in the air, as his strength bent the storm to his will. That night, the blizzard rose fierce, battering the roof until the walls moaned. Inside, the fire flickered and Hazel May sat close, her shawl pulled around her shoulders. Her father cursed the wind, drunk and bitter, railing that the world conspired against him. She thought of Elias out in that storm, wondered if he sheltered beneath pine or canyon stone, and the thought tightened her chest until it hurt. The days blurred, storm after storm, gossip after gossip. Yet beneath each, Hazel May began to change. She stepped outside more often, walking the snow paths Elias had cleared, her steps steady, her hands not always clutched tight at her chest. The whispers did not vanish, but her back grew straighter beneath them. For each cruel word, she remembered the quiet truth Elias had spoken. "I see your steps." One evening, she found him by the fence, mending where boards had splintered. The sky bled orange behind the storm clouds, and snow caught fire in the fading light. He straightened as she approached, and she held out her hand, palm open. "You've done much for us," she said softly, her voice nearly lost to the wind. His gaze lingered, unreadable, before he reached into his coat and placed something in her hand. A second carving, this one a feather. Light as air, yet etched with care so fine it seemed alive. Her breath caught. She wanted to ask why, to press him for meaning, but the words failed. Instead, she closed her fingers around it, the warmth of his hand brushing hers. That single touch kindled something fragile, dangerous, a spark in a town of dry timber. But gossip needs only a spark. Days later, her father stumbled into the tavern, anger spilling from him like liquor. He mocked her there before all, the blind daughter, useless, cursed. "She's no more than a burden," he spat, glass in hand. "That savage takes pity on her, but pity don't make her fit for a man." Laughter rose, harsh and cutting, feeding on his venom. Word of it reached Hazel May before sundown. She felt it in the eyes that followed her, in the snickers muffled behind hands. Her shame returned like a flood, drowning the fragile steps she had built. She fled home, the cedar bird clenched in her palm until the edges bit her skin. Inside the cabin, she sat trembling by the fire, her father's snores rattling the rafters. She told herself she should grow numb, should let the words wash over like they always had. But they clung this time, heavy, because they reached deeper, because Elias had seen her, and now the world sought to twist that sight into filth. She pressed her forehead to the windowpane, the cold shocking her skin. Beyond the glass, snow fell again, quiet and relentless. In the distance, through the blur of flakes, she glimpsed a figure moving, broad-shouldered, steady. Elias. He paused near the edge of the trees, his head tilted as though listening to something only he could hear. The sight filled her with both terror and longing. If he kept coming, the town would turn. If he stayed away, the ember inside her might die. The wind shifted, carrying faint voices. She strained to hear and caught the echo of laughter, cruel and sharp. Neighbors, gathering near. The storm above was not the only one brewing. Her hand tightened around the carved feather, the cedar edges biting her palm. She whispered into the empty room, her voice barely a thread. "I am not blind." And as the night deepened, torches flickered in the distance, glowing against the storm-dark sky. Their light wavered like fire in snow, a warning and a promise both. Hazel May's breath quickened. The gathering storm was no longer rumor, it was at her door. The storm struck with a violence that made the walls shudder. Snow hurled itself against the cabin, rattling the shutters like fists, while the wind screamed through every crack. Hazel May sat close to the fire, its glow flickering over her pale face, her hands wrapped around the cedar feather Elias had given her. The carved edges dug into her palm as though anchoring her to something more solid than the storm, more certain than the shame her father's words had carved into her life. Silas slept in his chair, his chin sunk to his chest, the empty bottle tilting near his boots. Each snore rattled like a nail driven deeper into the coffin of his dignity. Hazel May turned from him, her gaze fixed on the flames. Their light danced in her eyes, unsteady but alive, the only warmth she trusted. A knock came, soft, barely audible against the storm. She started, heart leaping. For a moment she thought it was only the wind, until the latch lifted and the door creaked open. Snow swirled inside, bringing with it the towering figure of Elias Redhawk. He shut the door with his back, the weight of the storm pressing against him before the latch clicked shut. For a moment he stood there, covered in snow, his chest bare as always, the heat of his breath rising like smoke. He said nothing, but the firelight caught the scars across his shoulders, the years of battles carved into his flesh. Hazel May's breath trembled. She felt both small and safe in his shadow. He set a bundle of wood by the hearth, the snow melting off his arms. She reached for the pieces, her fingers brushing his hand as she placed them onto the fire. The flames leapt higher, brightening the room, and for a moment she swore it was not the fire, but the nearness of him that warmed her. Her voice came low, uncertain. "They say I'm blind. Do you believe them?" Elias turned, his dark eyes steady, unreadable. He shook his head once, slow, deliberate. Then, in that voice that seemed carved from silence, he whispered, "He blinded them, not you." The words sank deep, like water soaking cracked earth. Hazel May pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes closing against the burn of tears. All her life her father's lie had wrapped her like chains. To hear them broken in a single sentence left her unsteady, as though she might fall if not for the steady burn of his gaze. The storm roared louder, shaking the cabin. Outside, faintly, another sound began to rise, voices. Hazel May stiffened. Through the howl of wind came shouts, angry, muffled but growing clearer. She hurried to the window and peered into the swirling snow. Shadows moved, torches flaring like fireflies in the blizzard. The town had come. Her breath caught. "They're here." Elias moved beside her, his frame filling the window's edge. His face did not change, though his jaw tightened. He looked down at her, waiting. Her father stirred but did not wake, the storm swallowing his drunken mutters. The shouts grew louder, words breaking through the wind. "Send her out. No more shame in this town. Savage, leave her be." The torches burned against the night, each one a tongue of fire fueled by gossip and fear. Hazel May trembled. Her whole life she had borne their judgment in silence, shrinking under the weight of it. But now Elias stood beside her, immovable as stone, and the firelight flickered across his scarred chest. The carved bird and feather lay warm against her skin, small proofs that someone had seen her not as broken but as whole. She turned from the window, facing him fully. "Stay," she whispered, her voice a thread yet unshakable. "Don't leave me." Something shifted in his eyes then, softer than the storm, deeper than silence. He nodded once, a vow made without flourish. The door rattled under fists. Hazel May flinched, but Elias only stepped forward, placing his hand on the latch. He did not open it yet, only held it steady, as though his strength alone might keep the storm at bay. The voices outside grew wilder. She recognized Ruthie Ann's shrill tone, urging them on, and Mrs. Hargrove's brittle piety, condemning her as fallen. Marshal Boone's voice tried to rise above the rest, but the mob swallowed him whole. Firelight glowed against the frosted panes, orange against white. Hazel May pressed her hands together, her chest rising with sharp breaths. Her father, still slumped in his chair, offered no shield. She realized then what Elias had already known. She could no longer hide behind silence. If she did, the town would blind her forever. Her knees shook, but she crossed the room and laid her hand over Elias's. His skin was rough, warm even in the cold. "Let me face them," she whispered. His brow furrowed, but he did not stop her. He lowered his hand from the latch, letting hers remain. She drew a breath, her lungs burning with fear and defiance, and pulled the door open. The storm rushed in, stinging her face. Torches flared in the swirling snow, their glow casting long shadows across the clearing. Dozens of eyes fixed on her, some wide with judgment, some with pity, some with hunger for scandal. Her father's lie hung in the air between them, heavy as chains. Hazel May gripped the doorframe, the storm whipping her hair across her face. Her voice shook, but she forced it higher than the wind. "I am not blind." The words cut sharp into the storm. The crowd wavered, murmurs rising, disbelief rippling like fire through dry grass. Marshal Boone's face shifted, his eyes searching hers. Ruthie Ann's mouth fell open, her torch trembling in her hand. Hazel May's chest heaved. For the first time, she stood not as her father's burden, nor as the town's shame, but as herself. Behind her, she felt Elias's presence, silent, steady, unmovable. The storm roared, the firelight flared, and the eyes of the town bore down upon her. And then, through the blaze of torches and snow, her father's voice tore from the cabin's shadows, thick with drink and fury. "Liar! You'll never be worth a damn!" The crowd gasped, silence shattering into chaos. Hazel May's breath caught, her body swaying as the storm lashed harder. Her father's shadow loomed behind her, and Elias stepped forward at last, his frame rising like a wall of stone. The fire hissed in the snow, torches cracking. In that moment, Hazel May felt it, the world tipping towards something she could not stop. And as Elias's hand brushed her shoulder, steadying her against the gale, she knew the next breath would change everything. The torches hissed in the storm, fire spitting as snow swallowed their edges. Hazel May stood in the doorway, her shawl whipping in the wind, her voice still echoing. "I am not blind." The words had torn something open in the night, and now there was no closing it. Faces in the crowd flickered with uncertainty, some frowning, some wide-eyed, some hungry still for blood. Yet all of them stared, waiting for her to falter. Silas lurched forward from the shadows of the cabin, his rage louder than the storm. His face was red with drink, his hair wild, his hands shaking as he pointed at her. "Liar! You've always been useless. Don't you dare shame me further." His words cut jagged, spat into the night. But they no longer pinned her. For the first time, Hazel May did not bow her head. Elias stepped closer, his height filling the doorway, his silence more commanding than any shout. The torchlight carved his scars into dark rivers, the storm painting him as something both human and beyond. He did not speak. He only stood beside her, a wall against the storm, and that presence alone turned the crowd's fury unsteady. Marshal Boone shoved through the front line, his coat whipping in the gale. "Enough!" he barked, though his voice trembled. His eyes searched Hazel May, lingered on her lifted chin, her steady gaze. Something in him shifted. The lawman's suspicion gave way to awe. "She ain't blind," he muttered, half to himself, half to the crowd. "She sees clearer than most." Ruthie Ann's lips tightened, but the torch in her hand wavered. Mrs. Hargrove clutched her Bible to her chest, her righteous fire dimming beneath the sight of the girl standing tall in the storm. Doubt crept into their voices, mutters growing softer, uncertain. Silas roared again, stumbling toward his daughter, his fists clenched. "You'll not defy me. You'll not belong to him." His body swayed, but his fury pushed him forward. Hazel May's breath caught, fear rising sharp, but Elias moved before she could flinch. He stepped down into the snow, placing himself between father and daughter. His shadow swallowed Silas whole. The drunkard struck out, a clumsy swing, but Elias caught his wrist midair, his grip firm as iron. The crowd gasped. For a heartbeat it seemed blood might follow, violence might erupt, but Elias did not strike. He held the man's trembling arm and lowered it slowly, his silence louder than thunder. Hazel May's heart pounded. She saw her father shrink beneath that silence, his rage cracking into weakness. His knees gave way, and he fell into the snow, breath ragged, curses lost in the wind. No one reached to help him. Not even Ruthie Ann. The mob's fire sputtered. Doubt spread wider now, their torches casting smaller shadows. Hazel May stepped forward, her feet crunching in the snow. The storm battered her shawl, but she lifted her chin higher than the wind. Her voice trembled, yet carried. "I see. I have always seen. And I will not live in chains of his making." The words cut the last string of doubt. The torches lowered, one by one, until only the storm's white fire lit the night. Mrs. Hargrove bowed her head. Ruthie Ann turned away, her gossip shriveling in her throat. Marshal Boone lifted a hand, urging them all back. Shame fell heavier than snow. Hazel May turned to Elias then. Her breath caught at the sight of him, steady in the storm, his dark hair tangled with flakes, his chest rising slow, certain. For a moment, all sound vanished but the beat of her heart. She reached for him, and he let her, her hand trembling as it touched the warmth of his scarred arm. Elias's eyes softened, his voice low, a whisper only for her. "Now I see you." Her throat tightened, tears breaking free, hot against the cold. Those words were not pity, not rescue. They were recognition, the very thing she had hungered for all her life. Behind them, her father wept into the snow, his body shrunken by shame. No one lifted him. The neighbors turned their backs, their judgment redirected, not at Hazel May now, but at the man who had shackled her with lies. The storm began to ease, the wind softening, the flakes drifting slower. Dawn pressed at the edges of the sky, faint light stirring in the east. Torches hissed out one by one, steam rising as their flames died in the snow. The crowd scattered, boots crunching away, their anger melted into silence. Only Elias, Hazel May, and the broken man in the snow remained. Hazel May's hand still rested on Elias's arm, her shoulders squared though her body trembled with release. She felt lighter, as though the storm had stripped away more than snow, as though it had burned her chains to ash. Elias bent, lifted her into his arms as though she weighed nothing. She startled, but his gaze steadied her, his silence telling her she was not carried as burden but as equal, as chosen. Her head rested against his shoulder, and the world that had once turned its back on her now felt smaller, less certain of its power. Inside the cabin, the fire glowed soft. Elias carried her across the threshold, setting her gently by the hearth. The cedar bird and feather lay where she had left them, glimmering in the light. She touched them with trembling fingers, her heart swelling with both fear and fierce hope. The storm outside faded into hush. The town would remember this night, would speak of it for years, perhaps in whispers, perhaps with shame. But Hazel May would no longer live bent beneath their voices. She had stood, she had spoken, and she had been seen. Elias crouched beside her, his eyes never leaving hers. The silence between them held more than words ever could. She felt the heat of his presence, the strength of his vow made without sound. For the first time in her life, she was not invisible. The last crackle of the fire filled the room. Hazel May's breath steadied. Her father lay forgotten in the snow. And as Elias's hand brushed hers once more, she knew the storm had not destroyed her. It had delivered her. The wind rattled faintly at the shutters, as though testing what remained. Hazel May looked toward the door, her voice soft but certain, carrying into the quiet. "The storm is not over. It has only begun."